A man in a suit walked into a diner and knelt before the waitress who once gave him free coffee. Her hands trembled as he said her name. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The morning shift at Marlowe's diner began not with a rush, but a rhythm. The metallic click of the register drawer, the low hiss of the coffee machine, the distant hum of cars gliding past cracked asphalt outside. Emily Carter, 29, moved through it all with practiced grace, the kind that goes unnoticed by everyone except the worn linoleum under her feet. Her light brown hair, knotted into the same loose braid she'd worn since high school, swung gently with each motion. Her apron was stained, her sneakers thinning at the soles, but there was a quiet order in the way she folded napkins, aligned salt shakers, refilled mugs. She was easy to overlook, and maybe that made things easier. Most regulars didn't bother learning her name. They ordered their eggs without looking up, made calls while she poured their coffee. Some handed her crumpled bills with greasy fingers, eyes still glued to their phones. Others nodded vaguely. Rarely did anyone say thank you. Emily never took it personally. She understood something most people forgot, that kindness only counts when it expects nothing back. So when the scruffy man in the gray hoodie started showing up just after sunrise, Emily didn't think twice. He always chose the corner booth by the window, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, hood drawn up even indoors. Early 40s, stubble thick, eyes rimmed with fatigue. He looked like a man hiding from the world, or maybe from himself. He never ordered, never spoke more than a murmured, "Thanks." But every day, Emily poured him coffee, black, steaming, set it on the table beside him, and walked away. No bill, no questions, no name. Beth, who'd worked at Marlowe's longer than anyone, didn't hide her disapproval. "If he can sit here every day, he can cough up a few bucks." She said it loud enough for Emily to hear, and maybe for him to hear too. But Emily never flinched. "I'd want someone to do the same for me," she said, wiping down the counter with slow, even strokes. She noticed the little things, the way his fingers trembled when he reached for the mug, the way he stared out the window like he was searching for something lost. She didn't know his story, but she knew pain recognizes quiet more than pity. So she gave him silence, and warmth, and coffee, because sometimes a simple cup meant more than anyone would ever admit. The booth by the window sat empty, but Emily still glanced at it each morning like she couldn't help herself. It had become part of her internal checklist. Unlock the front door, flick on the coffee machine, wipe the counter, and look, just once, at his booth. She never said his name because she never knew it. But somehow, his absence echoed louder than most people's presence. The first morning he didn't show up, she assumed he was sick, maybe running late. When he didn't come the next day, she wondered if he'd found another place. By the end of the first week, her thoughts had turned darker. Maybe something had happened, something permanent. By the second week, the small rituals began to unravel. She still poured a mug of black coffee and set it at his table, steam curling into the air like a question. Then she'd return to the counter and keep her hands busy, cleaning, stacking, refilling sugar jars, while her eyes betrayed her, stealing glances toward the window, hoping to catch a familiar silhouette walking through the haze of early sunlight. But he never came. Eventually, she stopped pouring the coffee. It wasn't some dramatic decision. One morning, her hands just didn't reach for the cup. The pot hissed behind her, but she let it be. The booth stayed empty, and the silence around it felt heavier than before, like it had gained mass. The diner, already quiet, grew quieter in her mind. Even the clink of plates and hum of Beth's gum-snapping commentary seemed dulled. Emily's world was shrinking, one unpaid bill at a time. Her hours were reduced after the manager blamed a slow quarter, The tips, never good, dwindled with each shift. She started skipping lunch, started wondering if the electricity bill could survive one more delay, started thinking maybe it was time to leave Marlowe's, maybe even the town altogether. But she didn't. Not yet. Because part of her, the part that still looked at that corner booth every morning, hadn't let go. There were no grand gestures, no silver linings wrapped in ribbon, just quiet survival. Just the same chipped countertop, just the same hiss of the coffee machine. Another Wednesday, another invisible weight pressing on her shoulders, and a booth that still felt like a pause in a sentence never finished. The bell above the door chimed, soft but sharp enough to slice through the rhythm of a slow afternoon. Emily didn't look up right away. Marlowe's rarely saw newcomers anymore, especially not dressed like that. The shoes hit the linoleum with a clean, confident cadence. Leather soles, no scuff marks. Crisp suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, a silk tie. A watch that could pay off her student debt and still cover rent for the year. She looked up out of habit and froze. The man didn't say a word at first, just walked past the front counter, his eyes scanning the booths with practiced familiarity until they landed on the one by the window, his booth. He sat down, and then he smiled. Emily blinked, heart stuttering in her chest. The angles of his face were sharper now, the stubble replaced by a clean shave. His hair was styled, sleek. He looked like someone who graced business magazine covers, someone who gave TED Talks in glass towers. But it was him, the man in the hoodie. "Hi, Emily," he said gently, like the name had never left his mouth. She stepped closer, cautious. "How do you know I never forgot," he said, voice low, steady. "You gave me coffee every morning when I couldn't even look myself in the mirror, when I had nothing to offer anyone. You didn't ask questions. You didn't make me feel like less." Emily's hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't speak. "I wasn't just broke," he continued. "I was broken, burned out, ashamed. I walked into this place because I didn't want to be seen, and you saw me anyway. Not for what I had, but for what I'd lost." He reached into his jacket. Emily instinctively thought it would be a check, a thank you card, something transactional. But what he pulled out wasn't money. It was a small, velvet box. He opened it, and inside, a ring caught the light. "I don't want to repay you," he said. "I want to build with you. I want to know what kindness like yours feels like every single morning. Emily, would you have coffee with me for the rest of our lives?" For a moment, time suspended. The clatter of dishes, the buzz of the overhead lights, Beth's gasp from the kitchen, all of it faded. Emily stood still, staring at the man who used to sit in silence, now dressed in power, offering something far more intimate than wealth. He had returned, not to settle a debt, but to begin a story. The clatter of a dropped plate rang out from the kitchen, sharp and shattering, but no one moved. Even Beth, who'd always had something to say, was silent now behind the swinging door. The hum of the overhead lights buzzed faintly, mingling with the low hiss of the coffee machine. Just enough noise to make the stillness feel electric. Emily stood behind the counter, motionless, except for her hands. They trembled at her sides, fingertips twitching with the kind of shock that sits too deep for words. Her braid was coming undone, a strand of light brown hair clinging to the side of her face. Her apron was creased and coffee-stained, the pocket half untucked. She hadn't touched up her lipstick since the morning rush. This wasn't the kind of moment life usually handed someone like her. And yet, here he was, kneeling in a tailored suit, holding out a velvet box with no irony, no condescension, just quiet certainty. She didn't look at the ring. She looked at him. His eyes weren't glittering with charm. They were steady, searching, full of that same vulnerable honesty she remembered from the mornings when he said nothing but always showed up. Only now, there was clarity there. Not gratitude, not guilt. Something more intimate, something real. Emily's throat tightened. She hadn't dreamed of this. Not because she didn't want it, but because dreaming of it would have felt foolish. The world didn't hand things like this to diner girls with rent past due, not in real life. And yet, something in her heart answered before her lips did. She nodded. A tear slipped down, catching on the corner of her mouth. "Yes," she said, barely audible, her voice cracking with disbelief and warmth all at once. "But this time," she smiled, shaky, eyes shining, "you're buying." He laughed, a deep, full sound that melted the formality in his suit and replaced it with the man she'd known in the silence. She laughed too, because somehow nothing about this felt ridiculous. Later, the world would turn their story into something glossy and headline-ready. Waitress marries billionaire after months of free coffee. But the truth was simpler than any fairy tale. This wasn't about money. This was about a man who had once been invisible, and a woman who saw him anyway. And in the end, it was kindness, not fortune, that wrote their beginning.